Transfer Deadline Day on talkSPORT with Jim White and Alex Crook.
Good evening, everybody. You're listening to the Transfer Deadline special with me, Jim White, and talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook. So, after 3 consecutive record-spending windows, has FFP led to boardroom hesitancy this time around? Is this now the new norm? Also this evening, has the Saudi bubble burst? Have those at the bottom done enough? And where exactly are the winners and the losers in this window? We'll keep you right across all the deals as they happen, right up until it closes in just under 1 hour's time. This is Jim White and Alex Crook with a Deadline Day special, and we are live on talkSPORT. Good evening, everybody. Now, for this special moment, we've moved into the studios of Talk TV, and we are coming to you live on YouTube and Facebook. So, as always, just like you do in the mornings with myself and Simon Jordan on talkSPORT, you can watch the show as well as listen to it. My colleague Alex Crook is with me as we look into some of the deals that will go down in the last hour or so. But this is a deadline day with a real difference, because what a difference a year makes in the world of transfers. This time last year, 1 hour before the January window closed, we had already hit a record winter Premier League spend. The figure stood at 602 million, and we ended with a total spend of 843 million pounds. At this point, where are we now? Just after 10 o'clock in the final hour, Chelsea were continuing their push for a British record bid worth £107 million. Do you remember it? For Benfica midfielder Enzo Fernandez. And Everton were set to end the night as the only Premier League side to do no business whatsoever. But it's all different this time around, I can tell you. With less than 1 hour to go, the Premier League spend currently sits at £76 million. Alex Crook, what has happened to deadline day and the final hour?
Well, it's certainly not been a deadline day like we know it. As you mentioned there, the amount of money spent this year wouldn't even amount to what Chelsea paid for Enzo Fernandez alone. So I think Premier League clubs are cutting their cloth accordingly. I think they've been spooked by those financial charges that have been dished out to Everton and to Nottingham Forest. Everton already deducted 10 points, of course. Will it be a sign of things to come, or come the summer, will we be back in full-on frenzy? We obviously hope for the latter. Time will tell. Who'd have thought Crystal Palace would be the biggest spenders on transfer deadline day? £22 million they've paid to sign Adam Wharton, a 19-year-old midfielder from Blackburn. Armando Broja on his way to Fulham from Chelsea. A loan deal that has caused so many headlines over the course of the afternoon and into the evening. And still deals being done. News just before we sat down in the studio. Tottenham beating Barcelona, the mighty Barcelona, to sign Lucas Bergvall. Doesn't turn 18 until tomorrow. He's on his way for a medical. He's going to spend his birthday undergoing that medical. And Jesse Lingard, remember him? He's off to South Korea.
He's off to South Korea. So, I mean, in spite of what I said in the introduction, there is activity and some big names are involved in it.
Absolutely. Big names, big clubs. I think what we've seen this year as well, because Burnley and Sheffield United look in danger of being marooned at the bottom of the table, those sides just above the relegation line, the likes of Brentford, even Nottingham Forest, though they are doing a little bit of business as we understand it. They're not going so manic on the last day of the window because effectively there's only one relegation place to play for.
Alex, you mentioned Crystal Palace. Quite recently, we saw Crystal Palace lose heavily at Arsenal, and there were some signs in the crowd in the away support saying they weren't happy with the activity of the board, or more accurately, the lack of activity of the board. The news tonight about Palace doing some business, will that please some of their fans listening tonight?
I think it will, and if you include the amount of money they spent on Munoz earlier in the window, the right back coming in, the Colombian, they spent over £30 million, Crystal Palace. That makes them, along with Tottenham, the biggest spenders in this transfer window. Of course, the issue there is who's going to manage these players next season, because Roy Hodgson is clearly coming to the end of his stellar career. I wonder if the potential new manager has been consulted about these signings.
For sure. Broja we knew about, and I know you've been following that one throughout the day. Jesse Lingard's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it shows that he's run out of options, that there was talk he might go to America. There was some interest in the summer from Saudi Arabian clubs. I was told Everton were looking at him earlier in the window. We know about his relationship with David Moyes. They wanted a winger. The fact West Ham didn't pull that cord probably tells you where Jesse Lingard sits at this moment in time. FC Seoul in South Korea. Can he revive his career there? It wasn't that long ago that Jesse Lingard was helping England and starring on the way to the World Cup semi-final.
Absolutely. We thought there might be some incomings or outgoings, more accurately, outgoings at Nottingham Forest. Are they anywhere near the headline news tonight?
Orel Mangala has completed his move to Lyon. That's a loan deal initially worth anywhere between 20 and 30 million pounds if he were to sign permanently in the summer. I think that's a bit of a reluctant transaction as far as Forest are concerned, because he started the bulk of their Premier League games this season. But again, it's a reflection that they're worried about those financial breaches. In terms of incomings, it wouldn't be a deadline day if Forest didn't do business. We thought this morning that Sam Johnston at Crystal Palace, the England goalkeeper, he could be on his way to the City ground. Turns out it's another goalkeeper in the form of Matt Sells, maybe aptly named on this deadline day. He's coming in from Strasbourg for £5.5 million. They were offered the chance late in the window as well to strengthen up front by signing Chuba Akpom, who did so well at Middlesbrough last season. He's at Ajax now. That deal is off, I'm told, because Forest were only willing to sign up to a loan with a permanent option if they stayed in the Premier League. And I think Ajax surveyed the league table. They looked at these charges that have come their way and thought, well, you're not guaranteed to be a Premier League club this time next season, so we're going to walk away from this deal.
OK. Tottenham have done some decent business, I would suggest, Alex. This fellow, Radu Dragusin, from Genoa to Tottenham, 25 million quid. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's about. I wonder if he'll make the difference between Tottenham going top 6 at the end of the season or even going top 4. Well,
I was at Tottenham last night. They struggled a bit in the first half, but second half at times they blew Brentford away, particularly with that lightning quick start. And Timo Werner, very much a part of that. He was one of the earlier additions that were made by a Premier League club in this window. Looked a clever bit of business at a time, a player with a point to prove, a player who fits Ange Postecoglou's style. And I spoke to him after the game last night and I asked him, are you going to stay beyond the end of the season? He was sheepish at first and he said, you know what, if we get in the Champions League, why not? So that's certainly one to keep an eye on at the end of the season into the summer. And this boy Bergvall, big clubs after him, not just Barcelona. Man City had him on the radar for the summer as well. Tottenham have got in early. I think they've had a brilliant window.
Alex, I've done some interviews today with various outlets talking about transfer deadline day. This is one, the likes of which I did not expect and I have never seen before. I mean, I was on the night that Mesut Ozil went to Arsenal and there was enormous reaction to that. When Berbatov went to Manchester United, when Robinho, it looked like he would go to Chelsea, he ended up going to Manchester City. Enormous reaction to that. I haven't seen the likes of this one, Alex, I don't think ever. Simon Jordan, my sparring partner in the mornings on talkSPORT, is sitting at home sniggering at us because he said, your days of media jubilation about transfer deadline day are well and truly over. I wonder, Alex, if he's got a point here. Is this the new norm? I'm beginning to think it is because of FFP and all the regulations that go with it and the attention that must be paid to it. I think now clubs are thinking very differently about their spending.
I agree, and these financial regulations aren't going to go away. I think the Premier League are determined to clamp down on anybody who oversteps the financial mark. We've seen it with Everton already. I know we're going to talk about their appeal, which we understand will be heard and decided upon by the middle of February. I don't think they're going to get those points back. I've been speaking to people who know far more about these legal matters than I do, and they think that the case from the independent panel will be pretty watertight. And I do think that's put the fear into a lot of Premier League clubs. And I've talked about this to you and Simon on the show as well.
Yeah.
We've been in a situation for the past few windows where Premier League clubs are effectively bidding against themselves. Enzo Fernandez, for example, who signed on this day a year ago for a British record fee of £105 million. Nobody else in Europe could get near that. The Spanish clubs aren't spending that kind of money. The German clubs don't spend that money. The Italian clubs, they're really struggling financially. I think maybe, as a collective, the Premier League teams have come together and said, you know what, guys, let's just stop driving up prices. Let's stop driving up wages. Let's try and be a bit more sensible about how we do our business. And I think fans will welcome that.
That's a great point you made, Alex. Last time around, last January, when Alex and I were doing this very show, I was checking my phone throughout. And you'll remember the news came through from a very high authority at Chelsea. Enzo Fernandez, we will get him. We have managed to get an extra hour to get the deal done. Remember that? It was a real nail biter towards the end. I'm looking at my phone tonight and a friend of mine is saying, where's the yellow tie? That's about the extent of it at this precise moment. It is very different. But hey-ho, it's different. Have you found it different today when you're calling up contacts at clubs, when you're calling up agents? I mean, agents have been phased right out of it, haven't they?
Yeah, they have, and I spoke to a lot of agents, actually, particularly last night. Normally, you make the call the day before the transfer window closes. What's going to happen tomorrow? They're busy beavering away. Most of them are sat on the sofa in front of the fire watching some kind of soap on television because there just wasn't any deals really in the offing. I'm actually surprised we've seen as much activity today as we have because it didn't look that way.
Alex, let me tell you, of course, there is football going on tonight. West Ham drew earlier on this evening 1-1 with Bournemouth. Manchester United are at Molineux up against Wolves. Now, Manchester United got off to a flyer with Marcus Rashford opening the scoring. With minutes to go, in fact, we're in the 95th minute. It is now Wolves 3, Manchester United 3. This is something else. This one, a 6-goal thriller. And you and I both thought as we made our way into the studio tonight, the United had 3 points. They haven't.
No, they've twice been 2 goals up and twice have thrown it away. We're seeing pictures of Erik Ten Hag. He just turned his back in frustration. It's been the story of the season for Manchester United. Just when you think there's a turning point, they go and shoot themselves firmly in the foot. Intriguing to see Marcus Rashford not only starting the game tonight, but starting with that 25-yarder into the top corner. And we reported on talkSPORT yesterday because there has been some conjecture that maybe Paris Saint-Germain might try their luck on deadline day for Marcus Rashford. United want him to stay. They want him to get back to focusing on football. They want him to start delivering on the pitch as he did last season. So I guess if you're looking for positives and they've thrown away these points at the end of the game, that would be a big one for Erik Ten Hag.
Did you think it would start tonight? I was surprised to see
I
it
was
start in the
surprised.
11.
I wasn't sure it necessarily sent the right message of a manager in complete control of a dressing room. But I guess if he goes out, he pops a shot into the top corner within the first few minutes, then Ten Hag will say his selection is justified.
So Manchester United fans, obviously you will want to react.
They've scored again, Jim. Manchester
United, I can tell you, look as if they've just won the game. Would you believe it? It is now 4-3 in the something like 96th, 97th minute. Mainu, in the 97th minute, seems to have won this, what is a 7-goal thriller. Wolves 3, Manchester United 4. How about that? Sir Alex at Molineux tonight looking on as Manchester United appear to have done it. What about that?
Well, there's a smile on my face again.
Yeah. Well, there'll be a smile on Ten Hag's face as well. But this is a big win for him after the publicity that went on around the Marcus Rashford situation. They've gone there tonight and they've won at the death. And
it's a tough place to go, Molineux. There's been some big teams who've gone there this season. Tottenham were beaten in the last minute. Chelsea were well beaten just before Christmas. So to go there and concede so late in the game and then go straight up the other end, it's a brilliant finish from young Mainu. What a player he is. This is a real character-building performance from Manchester United. Could be a turning point. Who knows? It could be. Manchester United fans will no doubt want to get their calls into the sports bar right now to have your say on the outcome of that match tonight. Wolves 3, Manchester United 4. What a finish that is. So if you want to call Jamie O'Hara and Jermaine Pennant, give them a call now. 03717 223344. Not just on that scoreline from Molineux, but on everything else that's going on in and around transfer deadline day. Of course, it's all about finance. Like never before. FFP, the 3 initials we've all had to get used to. And when we come back, the other side of this upcoming break, in studio with us, FFP expert and former advisor to Manchester City, Stefan Borson, Jim White and Alex Crook, live on talkSPORT.
It is the final hour of transfer deadline day, and I can tell you some deals going down. Alex Crook is alongside me here in studio because we are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. If you want to watch the show, you can head over to the official talkSPORT channel on those platforms. We've moved downstairs to one of the smart studios of Talk TV so that we can stream live on YouTube and Facebook. We are live, of course, to you all out there on talkSPORT. Alex, it has just finished at Molineux and Manchester United have won it. What a result. 4-3 United.
What a game as well. And some brilliant goals. I mean, the goal that Pedro Neto scored to seemingly salvage a point for Wolves was sensational. And then Kobbie Mainoo, right from the restart, has just passed the ball, as you said, Jim, during the break there, into the bottom corner. Could be a big win that for Erik ten Hag, because let's not make a mistake about it. He is under the microscope. So Jim Ratcliffe is in there. They've kept their powder dry, Manchester United, in this transfer window. No additions, a couple of young players going out on loan. It's going to be a big, big summer at Old Trafford.
As a result of that result, Manchester United move up to 7th. But of course, the emphasis tonight, and this is why we are here, is on transfers. And Alex, I think you've got a bit of breaking news on Burnley.
Yeah. Burnley and also Jesse Lingard, our colleague Ben Jacobs, who's going to join us later on. He's just messaged me to say Jesse Lingard very close now to that move to FC Seoul. A 2-year contract with the option of an extra year. Former Manchester United player, of course, most recently at Nottingham Forest, without a club since the start of the season. He's going to try and rebuild his career in the Far East. We thought Burnley were trying to bring in Thomas Meunier, their experienced Belgian right-back from Borussia Dortmund. They have signed a full-back very late in the window, but it isn't Meunier. Instead, it is a defender coming in from Rennes over in France. Lorenz Assignon has signed on loan for the rest of the season. So Vincent Kompany doing a bit of business on this deadline day to try and give his side the chance to stay up. I think it's probably quite a forlorn chance.
OK, Alex, for the moment, thank you very much. Alex is across everything that's happening, of course, whatever happens in the final hour of this window. Alex will get the news, get it out there first and fastest to you on talkSPORT. As I said, we're streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. You will have seen, if you're watching tonight, and many of you are, we're delighted about that, incidentally, that the two of us has become the three of us, because here in studio we are joined by a financial fair play expert and former financial advisor to Manchester City. He joined Simon and myself on talkSPORT the other day and made headline news, and he is Stefan Borst. And Stefan, good evening to you.
Evening.
Those three little initials, FFP, it's killed the window, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a massive impact. You know, teams have got to look at things differently after Everton. So it's the combination, I think, of the FFP rules that people were concerned about, but the game changer, of course, a 10-point deduction for Everton, which means that for a long time people have talked about the rules not having teeth. Well, 10 points is teeth. And,
do you think that 10-point deduction there and then, Stefan, put fear into the other boardrooms all around the country?
Yeah, I mean, everywhere. I think anyone that was close to the limit or were assuming that they would sell players between when the Everton decision happened in October and the end of the season, it's just shaken people. So they're now, the calculus of being able to ship out a player for 10, 20, 30 million quid has changed. You don't have that certainty. And if you haven't got the certainty that you can sell players and make the profits that you need to make the limits, you can't buy. So we have a paralysis in the market, which is why, you know, we've seen obviously almost no deals, but even the loan deals, people have been reluctant to spend the money.
Yes.
You know, people have been haggling over even relatively small amounts of money on loan fees.
But Stefan, you couldn't have expected this. Last January, 843 million. Tonight, 76.
Yeah. Well, look, Chelsea distorted the market slightly last season, right? We all know that. Their spending was unusual, shall we say, putting it politely. But you know, I think there's no other way. When you have the combination of the 10 points, plus what happens when we look at this 3-year period that's going to be assessed next December, the year that's dropping out was a COVID year. And what that means is loads of teams had allowances, extra allowances for COVID. It meant that it was a year that most people from a FFP perspective actually had some of their best performance over the last 5 years. But when that drops out, when we do the assessment in December of this year, things are going to change.
Yeah.
You know, so people are going to be much closer to the limits. So you have a combination of teams who have chosen not to spend. So that's people like Arsenal, because Arsenal could spend if they want to. If they were to invest the necessary equity, they could push their limit up to 105 million from the 15 that it is now. But they've opted to sort of stay out of the market.
If they'd wanted to spend, Stefan, tonight, how much could they have spent, Arsenal?
Well, it's always very, very hard to calculate the exact amount. Certainly, tens of millions of pounds on a player. They could have bought the striker that everybody thinks they need.
Exactly. They could have got a striker and been nowhere near danger.
If they'd have chosen to, it would have required the owners to have put in very considerable amounts of equity. So they would have had to put their hands in their pockets. And ultimately, I think in line with most of the game around Europe, there is a limit, and people are saying, actually, I don't want to do it anymore.
Is this temporary, or is it the new norm? Should Alex and I get used to this?
We'll have to see. I mean, it's going to very much depend on the rules that they bring in. So we know that there's a Premier League meeting coming up in the next couple of days where they will start to formulate a new set of rules. It is, as I understand it, likely that it will not affect the current season and that those rules will come in for next season and the seasons after. But the problem with all of the FFP rule sets is they're trying to make one size fits all. But there's so many different interests in the Premier League. You have the American-led teams, the sort of private equity mindset. You have City, Newcastle, possibly looking with a slightly different view of things. And then you have the smaller clubs, as Richard Masters called them in Parliament.
Yeah.
And they have a different set of requirements as well. So trying to formulate one set of rules, whilst also, and we have to be mindful of this, whilst also making sure that the teams that have breached historically and maybe are on the edge now also don't get away with it. So teams are going to be saying, hang on a minute, we're not changing the rules just as Chelsea are in trouble. We want to make sure that the rules still apply to the extent that people get punished for the previous rules.
What about the figure, Stefan? Because it's £105 million you're allowed to lose over 3 years. A senior executive at a Premier League club said to me recently, that doesn't really work. When you look at when that benchmark was set, the game's different now. You've got inflation, the economic picture in the world has changed, let alone in the football world. You've got richer owners coming into football. You've got players earning more money. Does the threshold need to be increased from £105 million over 3 years?
Well, look, it hasn't moved for years, right? So
it hasn't moved with inflation and with the changing economic situation.
And if you were to look at it with inflation, it maybe would be £200 million, or somewhere in that order, maybe 170. But people misunderstand the 105. The 105 is after numerous allowances have already been made. So, teams have made very, very substantial losses. And then on top of that, have been allowed certain add-backs for things like good expenditure, such as the stadium, the women's team, other depreciation charges, all sorts of additional things that are added back. So the losses to breach 105 are actually very, very significant.
You mentioned the stadium there. Obviously, Everton's argument, the basis of their appeal, as I understand it, is the fact that interest payments on loans taken out to build what looks a fantastic facility at Bramley Moor Dock, they didn't think they would count as overspend. Do they have a leg to stand on? Is that going to hold up? I don't think it will.
No. And look, even Everton didn't argue these things, right? By the end of the independent commission, they were about £2 million apart in terms of the level of breach. All of the independent commission effectively established at the end was that they breached by 20 million rather than 10. But really, Everton had sort of admitted the difference aside from 2.2 million. Which was what it was in the end. There was then an argument, really, only about aggravating factors and mitigation. They even agreed, Everton, and this is one thing that hasn't come across at all, and maybe because it's the way Everton are briefing it, I don't know, but Everton fans have been somewhat misled. At the end of the day, Everton and the Premier League, both at the Independent Commission, accepted the principles of sanction. Those parameters by which the club would be sanctioned. So that there needed to be a punishment, that it was a serious offence, that it was a sporting sanction and not merely a financial sanction. Then the only thing that was then outstanding was, OK, what aggravated the breach? And in Everton's case, the Independent Commission found that they misled the Premier League. on certain aspects. And the level of mitigation ultimately was pretty slim, because the arguments that were raised by Everton there were pretty weak.
So we're going to know the result of the appeal. We'll know fairly soon, I think mid-February. Second guess it for us, Stefan.
They may give them a token couple of points off for you know, them to try and give them something. But the reality is that the arguments that they're able to run, remember, they're not going to review the facts again. The facts are settled. The Independent Commission has decided what happened. They've decided there was a breach. So really the appeal is likely to be only about whether due weight was given to the aggravating factors and the mitigating factors, and whether something was missed. So if you looked at, for example, the Sheffield Wednesday situation that many people look at to say Everton's fine, a sanction will be reduced in half, in that situation it was different, because what happened was that they missed a key factor, according to the appeal, which was the sale of the stadium. Everton don't appear to have that kind of argument here.
Yeah.
And in the absence of that kind of argument, it's hard to see how a materially different outcome is achieved by them on appeal.
Stefan, we're heading to another break. We'll take that break because we're in the final hour of the transfer deadline day as it stands, of course. We don't want to be the bringers of doom and gloom, but we'll stick on this theme because Everton fans biting their nails to some degree at this time. Nottingham Forest sailing close to the wind, of course, we know as well. And Chelsea, with the new American ownership, having spent $1 billion, what can they expect further down the line? It is Jim White, Alex Crook and Stefan Boston. We are live on talkSPORT, and we're coming to you live, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. Stay with us. It is a situation I have been in on many occasions. It's the final hour of transfer deadline day. But I haven't been in this kind of situation before because FFP is the order of the day. Not a lot going on out there because clubs are watching their spending. Premier League boardrooms extremely mindful that they've got to watch the pounds and the pennies. Alex Crook is alongside me here in the studio tonight as we come to you live, of course, on talkSPORT and live on YouTube as well. Alex, we're well into the final hour. Half an hour to go, less than, until we hit the deadline. What is going on out there?
Still quite a bit, Jim. Deals being announced all the time. Bournemouth have, in the last few moments, confirmed a story we told you about very early this morning. Enis Unal, a striker from Getafe over in Spain. He's completed what will be a loan deal initially. There's also a £14 million option in that deal. That could be a really good signing for Bournemouth. This was a player who, at the end of last season, was on his way to Benfica to play Champions League football. He suffered a very serious knee injury. That scuppered that move. Here he comes now to the Vitality. It's enabled Kiefer Moore to drop into the Championship and join Ipswich, who are going for promotion. Still nothing official yet from either Chelsea or Fulham in terms of Armando Broja, but we are told at talkSPORT that deal is done and will be official before the 11 o'clock deadline. Armando Broja on his way across West London. That was a deal that was on this morning, then it was off, and then it was on again, but only after Chelsea lowered their financial demands. £4 million, the complete package, and actually that number will go down the more that Broja plays. If he misses games, Fulham have to pay a bigger fee.
Right. It was thought that Conor Gallagher might be out of Chelsea on his way to Tottenham. How close did that come?
I don't think it came close at all, Jim. To be honest, I've been in touch with people close to Conor throughout the window. They've been relaxed about his situation. They were quite happy for him to get to the end of the season. He'll have a year left on his contract. Chelsea are going to find themselves actually in a similar position to they did with Mason Mount, an academy product, in the last year of his contract. Do they cash in or do they give him a new deal? He has plenty of reason to stay at Stamford Bridge. He's a regular starter under Mauricio Pochettino. He could well captain the side in the League Cup final in a couple of weeks. Why would he leave? And Tottenham needed to shift Højbjerg to even make it a possibility. That didn't happen either.
Stefan Borson is in studio with Alex and myself tonight, financial fair play expert, former advisor to Manchester City. Having said all that, Stefan, had Chelsea managed to get Conor Gallagher out of there and over to Tottenham, it would have helped them from a financial viewpoint, would it not?
Yeah, look, we all know the pure profits that you get from selling your youngsters off that have no book value. So fine, but clearly to sell off your captain and near ever-present player to your local rivals was a slightly unusual situation. So I think when we looked at that at the start of the window, we were thinking, what's going on there? Look, it's not a big surprise that of all the people that didn't bite at 50 to 80 million pounds, that Daniel Levy sort of paused and said, I'll wait and see what happens next.
Yeah.
Because he knows, I'm quite sure that within the Premier League, but within particularly teams like Spurs, they understand Chelsea's predicament when it comes to PSR, financial fair play, for this season, and they will take advantage of that. And that's what you've seen with Broja. You know, they talked about, again, 50 to 60 million quid at the start of the window, or even a couple of weeks ago. And he ends up going for potentially zero, actually. The loan fee might be zero.
If he plays every game.
If he plays every game.
Yeah.
So are clubs, Stefan, studying other clubs' accounts and then making their minds up as to how they'll behave, what kind of activity they will have?
Well, it's about leverage in the negotiation. And at the end of the day, if you're looking at buying a player, I mean, this is, arguably with Arsenal and United in the last window, arguably they let Chelsea off the hook by taking Havertz for 67, which I think was somewhere in the region of a 35 million quid book profit, and by taking Mason Mount for 55. Again, 55 million quid profit. Those two profits made a massive difference to Chelsea's ability to hit financial fair play for last year.
Yeah, but having said that, Chelsea have spent, since Bowley and Igbali came in, Chelsea have spent something in the region of £1 billion. So how have they managed to get round FFP? That's what everybody's asking.
Yeah, well, look, they've used...
Is there trouble on the horizon?
Tricks of amortisation. In my mind, there's certainly trouble on the horizon, and they will certainly fail financial fair play for the current season, unless It seems to me very unlikely that by the 30th of June this year, they sell well over £100 million of players. But the window that they can now do that, now that the window is about to slam shut,
or close quietly anyway.
Close quietly this year.
Yes.
It's going to be very small because the season's going to finish and we've got the Euros. So if you look at someone like Gallagher's going to be in the Euros from the 14th of June. So if they want to ship Gallagher before the 30th of June, they've got to move very, very quickly. And again, the likely buyers are going to know that Chelsea need to sell players.
They've shown their hand, haven't they?
Well, I think
in that
so.
respect. And is it mischievous of me to suggest this window once again proves that Todd Boehly and the Chelsea staff working under him really don't know what they're doing, because they've been bad buyers in the last 3 transfer windows. They've effectively bidded against themselves for the likes of Fernandes, who we talked about. For me, they paid too much money for Moises Caicedo. And now they've been bad sellers as well. I mean, I know you mentioned what they did in the summer, but in terms of Conor Gallagher, they set the benchmark so high, nobody was going to bite at that. This is a player who will only have a year left on his contract, so they're not really in the strongest position there. And when you look at Breuer, how do you go from asking for £50 million a week ago to literally giving him away in the final hours of the transfer window? I'd be very concerned if I was a Chelsea fan. I'd be very concerned if I was Mauricio Pochettino. Do these guys who are paying my wages, do they actually know how to run a football club?
Yeah, look, they must do. And at the end of the day, they're very smart guys. They must know what they're doing, right? I think if you look at the quality of people in that club at all levels, they must have a plan. I think one thing that might have changed the calculus, though, is the Everton situation. If you work on the basis that you can breach financial fair play and pay a financial penalty, it's a cost of doing business. When it's a very big point sanction, it's a different ballgame, because you can't tell what that 10 or 20 points is going to do.
Yes, yeah.
And by the way, this breach that Chelsea are lined up for is much bigger than Everton's breach. And most importantly, from an aggravating perspective, they will consider it deliberate. It won't be. They can't hide behind having built a stadium or inadvertently breach financial fair play. So if they breach, when it comes to the assessment of the sanction, and remember the way this works.
If they breach, or when now
well,
that
I think they'll breach, but the period, the accounting period, is not over yet. I mean, let's be fair to Chelsea. And I have lots of people telling me, well, you just sell Conor Gallagher for 60 million, you sell Brozier for 40, you sell James for 30, or whoever it is. People come up with this list of players that they can just sell, but there's no buyers. There's no money in the game at the moment outside of the Premier League, and the Premier League are not stupid. They're not going to bite on these crazy prices for players that they don't rate that highly, where they know that Chelsea are over barrel.
So are we certainly looking further down the line? We haven't got it in for Chelsea, incidentally. Don't think that we have. But we have to talk about it, because this is where we're at. When it comes along and the penalty becomes apparent, what kind of penalty are we talking about?
Well, look, let's say I'm totally wrong about Everton and it's overturned and it becomes a financial penalty, then okay.
Bowley, is that open season then?
Well, it will be open season, yeah. And Chelsea will have been vindicated to some extent. They'll pay their financial penalty and it'll all be fine. And Bowley will add that to the £2.5 billion that he spent on the club. But if Everton is not overturned and there is a points penalty because they've had a sporting advantage, which they clearly have had a sporting advantage. When you buy players of that scale, you've had a sporting advantage, and sporting advantage is not about how they perform on the field. It doesn't depend whether those players work. If you signed £300 million players, there is an assumption that you've had a sporting advantage. So with a breach as big as it looks like Chelsea are going to have, and I say that because they're in a season where they're not in Europe at all. And so we know roughly what their revenue is going to be. We know what their wage bill roughly is going to be. It didn't drop. So everybody was saying that the wage bill was going to drop for 22-23, but we now know from the Deloitte Money League that actually the wage bill went up. So Deloitte's had the wage bill at £404 million for last season. Now, 45 of that looks like it is the money that went out Tuchel and to Graham Potter.
Yep.
So, and to Brighton, because Brighton got 21 million quid.
Yeah.
So we think the wage bill was probably 360 on revenue of about 500. But when you've got a wage bill of 360 on revenue of 500, you've not got a lot of leeway there. You've got operating expenses for the business, which takes it down to effectively zero in terms of the operating position. And then on top of that, you've got something like £180 million of amortisation for last year, which comes off. So their losses last year were something like £200 million for an FFP, from an FFP perspective, before you start adding stuff back. So
they should be bracing themselves, is what you're saying.
It's very hard to see any other way in which the numbers look. They're not even close when you look at the numbers.
Okay.
They've still got two big earners to come back as well at the end of the season, by the way. Romelu Lukaku, only on loan.
Yeah.
Kepa Arrizabalaga, only on loan.
Okay. They're counting the pennies because, like never before, FFP has kicked in. And that is what makes this transfer window a very different one to anything we have known in the past. Having said all that, we're into the final minutes of it now. You're with us live on talkSPORT. Stefan Borson, financial fair play expert, is alongside us, guiding us through the whys and wherefores of careful spending tonight. And Alex Crook is with me as we look at the final deals that are going down, and we'll bring you those in just a moment as we approach 11 o'clock right here live on talkSPORT and live on YouTube. Oh yes, it's that moment, isn't it? I remember it so well. I've seen it so many times. It is the final hour, the final minutes of transfer deadline day. This one being the January transfer deadline. And of course, all the business that usually gets done isn't quite getting done around now because of those three letters that we've been talking about, FFP. Alex Crook is alongside me. Alex, what's going down in the final hours?
Well, we're still waiting for that official confirmation from Fulham. They have completed a deal for Armando Broja. Spoke a lot about Chelsea in the last part of the programme.
Yep.
We do believe the paperwork has been signed, so don't worry, Fulham fans, you will get your man. And that is quite an important signing for Fulham because Raul Jimenez is going to be sidelined for a little while. I watched them toil really to a 0-0 draw against Everton at the weekend and in midweek, and they were lacking a punch. And obviously Broja, I think, will go there with a point to prove. He's that type of personality. He certainly believes in his own ability. If he can back that up on the pitch, that could just propel Fulham somewhere towards the top half of the table. So
good for Fulham. They've done some business and they've got the man in that they wanted to get in. You will see in here that the three of us has become the four of us because we're joined. Stefan Boston stays with us, financial fair play expert. And on the scene now is talkSPORT Saudi correspondent Ben Jacobs. Ben, great to see you, my friend. It's an interesting set of circumstances, Ben, because the Saudi clubs have been oddly quiet, have they not? I mean, last summer, they were the second biggest spenders behind the Premier League. This time around, they've been nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is because quotas are full and there's a seasonal budget. So there's 17 billion in the bank until 2030, but each season's basically only got a portion of that. They spent it all in summer. You then head into January, you've got no space for stars and you've got no money for stars.
So they did their money in, Stefan, in other words, as Ben says, and now they've got nothing to fling around in the final hours of this window. But the Saudis have made a difference, have they not, Stefan? You must have seen that from a financial viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like oxygen for the Premier League. I mean, you know, when you have that amount of money coming in, especially taking out some of the players that maybe were a bit sticky, some of the Chelsea players that they shifted out there, and obviously one of the Newcastle players, it makes a big difference. And if they come again in the summer, it will again give the whole Premier League a lift. And what happens once the Premier League has that lift and has that oxygen of the Saudi external money, that then filters down throughout Europe. I mean, really, the whole of the European game now is more or less dependent on what the Premier League spend first.
Sure, they will be back in the summer of that, there's no doubt. Newcastle fans asking tonight, Almiron, how close was it? It looked like he would be out of Newcastle heading to Saudi. It seemed it was all but done.
Yeah, it was close on the club-to-club side, but not on the player side. So there was a verbal agreement for about 30 million euros, 26 million quid between Newcastle United and Al Shabab, who are not one of the PIF clubs. So this wasn't Newcastle negotiating with Newcastle, if you like. But it was a very quick verbal agreement because we know that Newcastle are looking for outgoings and finances so they can free up funds for the summer and also to stay within profit and sustainability. But then they went to Miguel Almiron, and apparently Almiron's agent was quite surprised because this advanced deal had materialised and yet they didn't know that much about it. It's quite common in Saudi to go club to club first and then you can put pressure on a player because maybe Newcastle can also lean on Miguel Almiron, and that happened to an extent, but Almiron said no, and as a result he's now one to watch in the summer because I think Newcastle still need to sell.
Alex, you look as if something's going on out there, is it?
No, I was just going to chip into the Newcastle conversation. From what I was told, Newcastle, of the players that were linked away, there was obviously serious interest in Kieran Trippier, tentative interest, I think, in Callum Wilson, but no more than that. Of the three, Almiron was the one, I think, reluctantly, that Eddie Howe was willing to let go to raise that cash, maybe to bring in a new number 8, which is the position they're looking to strengthen. And I think, as Ben says there, in the summer, that their situation doesn't change. I broke this story probably 4 weeks ago now in my transfer note, but they are going to have to cash in on a big player, be that Bruno Guimaraes, be that Alexander Isak, I think would have interest from the likes of Arsenal, or be that Sven Botman. In order to take that next step forward, I think Newcastle are almost going to have to do what Aston Villa did with Jack Grealish, get the big money for one of their crown jewels, and then reinvest in the rest of the squad. Actually,
you've taken me nicely to it. Eddie Howe was speaking on that very theme, Alex, about how things have changed regarding the watching of the pennies. This was Eddie.
Keeping the squad intact as the manager, trying to produce a team that to win games would probably be A1 for me. But as I said so many times, we are guardians of the club's future and we want to make the right decisions for the club's future. And FFP, we don't want to breach FFP. We want to definitely comply with the rules. So that's where I will support the decisions that are made for the long-term benefit of the club. The war chest days, or what analogy you want to put on it, I think every club's doing what we're doing. You can see that with the market, as I've said many times, that the market's different this year. This is a totally different January to the 12 months before. And I'm sure the summer may well be the same in a sense that it's a different way of doing transfer business now for football clubs.
You know, he said it there, didn't he? The war chest days are over. Will the summer window be the same as this one? Surely not, Stephen.
I think it'll all depend on Saudi. So if Saudi come in and players go, you know, that's the big unknown. Will players continue to go to Saudi? I mean, it's been a bit of a mixed bag for quite a few of the players that have gone over there. And what is the profile of the player that's prepared to go? The younger players presumably won't want to go. And so if the Saudi money comes in, it's so enormous, as Ben just outlined, that of course it will have an impact. And of course it will flow down because it's just such an incredible boost for all of these clubs.
Ben, what is your gut feeling? You're there a lot of the time. Will players, as Stephen said, it's a perfect question, will players still want to go there? It seems ridiculous for the money. Of course they will. But do they want to go there as a football venue?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure is going to take time to catch up with the ambition. So I think the Saudi deal makers will say that anyone leaving too early is going to maybe regret that and not see the full picture. But you can't have a mass exodus because those players will talk and then expect there not to be a knock-on effect. So Jordan Henderson might speak to some Premier League players. If Karim Benzema's unhappy, he might speak to Luka Modric. So this presents a little bit of a challenge, but I sense that the money will be overpowering. And I also think that if every season it gets better in terms of infrastructure, then players that have got fears are going to be able to see firsthand that things are improving and they will still go. So I think we're going to be in for a big summer. I think Mo Salah will have an offer, Kevin De Bruyne will have an offer, Son from Spurs will have an offer, Casemiro could get an offer, Rafa Varane could get an offer. So they're not going to be short of targets, and if enough of them go, then they'll still have more stars, even if they have exoduses like Jordan Henderson.
We're going to go for now. We'll be back in a second because obviously it's the witching hour. We're coming up to the deadline itself. So myself, Alex Crook, Stephen Borson, Ben Jacobs invite you to join us as we go through the transfer deadline at 11 o'clock itself. It's a different kind of deadline day, but we knew that all along, didn't we? Stay with us. Well, now, it's the final minutes, literally, of the January transfer window. The movers and shakers, if there are any out there tonight because of FFP getting the final business done. Alex Crook's alongside me. Minutes to go until the 11 o'clock deadline, Alex. What have you got for us?
Well, we're expecting confirmation from Nottingham Forest before the window closes that they've completed that deal that we spoke about right at the top of the programme. Matt Sells, goalkeeper, coming in from Strasbourg. Had a spell at Newcastle. Actually, only played 9 league games for them under Rafa Benitez. But signing a new goalkeeper was Forest priority coming into the window. They picked up Gio Reyna yesterday, of course, from Borussia Dortmund, and Rodrigo Ribeiro, a youngster on loan from Sporting Lisbon initially. Breuer, the big one. As I say, we expect that one to go through. And a couple of departures still to be confirmed at West Ham as well. I think their fans are a bit worried about a lack of squad depth potentially when these go through. Saïd Benrahma off to Lyon on loan initially. There'll be an obligation included in that deal, we understand. And Pablo Fornal is very much a cult hero amongst West Ham fans. He's off to link up with Manuel Pellegrini at Real Betis.
OK, Pablo Fornal. It seems he's been at West Ham forever. Popular lad, as Alex was saying. In a moment, further reaction from Ben Jacobs, the Saudi correspondent, and Stefan Boston, FFP expert. Another transfer deadline day comes and goes. The window is closed. There you go. Just like that. They come and go. And now it's up to ourselves here in studio and live in talkSPORT to analyse what we can analyse, because FFP has changed everything. Of that, there is no doubt. Before I go to Stefan, before I go to Ben again, Alex, who would you say, in what is a very different window, who would you say have been the winners, who would you say have been losers?
I think Spurs are the winners. I think we talked about it earlier. They got the deals that Ange Postecoglou wanted relatively early in Werner and Dragusin, one of the few paid-for signings in this window. The fact they've managed to get Bergvall from under the noses of Barcelona right at the death, I think, is a big feather in their caps as well. I think quietly Palace have done OK with the 2 signings they've made just to give Roy Hodgson a bit of squad depth between now and the end of the season. I think Everton, one of the losers. I saw them in midweek at Fulham. Honestly, you know, they couldn't finish their dinner at Craven Cottage. Dominic Calvert-Lewin hasn't scored for 16 games. Beto looks like he'll never score again. I fear for Everton. You know, with or without the points deduction, I think they're in big trouble. So I think they're certainly one of the losers of this transfer window. It's been fairly middling. Apart from that, Newcastle look weak. I do think Newcastle, in an ideal world, would have wanted to sign a couple of players. Obviously, Calvin Phillips being one of them.
Calvin Phillips, and of course the Euros in the summer, he has to play, and he hasn't been playing. He's got to play if he's going to interest Gareth Southgate and stay in that squad. He played tonight for West Ham. West Ham drew with Bournemouth, but I'm afraid to say, Alex, from what I hear, he didn't have the best of starts in a West Ham jersey in terms of the opening goal.
Gave away a goal inside 3 minutes. But that was one of the concerns, actually, for clubs who were looking at Calvin Phillips, and probably why he ended up at West Ham, was the fact he hasn't played much football this season. Is he fully up to speed? And, of course, Pep Guardiola has publicly criticised his lack of match sharpness. So I do think that, and the fact City were asking at one stage for such a high loan fee, did put off a lot of clubs.
Would you consider that Brentford, having held on to Ivan Toney in this window, could be considered a winner in this window?
Well,
they want his firepower, obviously.
Yeah, that was massive for them when he scored in both games he's played since returning from that 8-month ban. He looks like he's determined to have a strong end to the season because, of course, he wants to be in Gareth Southgate's plans for the Euros as well. I don't think it was ever a realistic possibility that Brentford cashed in on Ivan Toney. I don't think the market was there. Chelsea, I think, still have reservations about the fact he's 28 years of age, and we've been talking about it all night. There won't be any sell-on value, probably the same for Arsenal. But listen, if he scores 10 goals between now and the end of the season, I think someone will take a punt come the summer. I'm
going to come to Ben in a second, but Stefan, I keep on saying it. Covered many, many transfer deadline days. And in the final hour, there's always crazy excitement. I can remember the scene in the studios of Sky Sports News. We're live in talkSPORT tonight. We haven't seen anything like this. Again, Stefan, I ask you, is this the new norm, or will the summer be different?
Yeah, I think the summer probably... Well, the summer will be very different from this. I mean, this is you know, almost dead. I mean, relatively speaking, compared to previous years. So the summer will be will normalise to an extent, but the same themes are going to be there. As I say, I think if you can have external money coming into the market, that gives it the oxygen. And then Once the money starts moving around, that's when the deals start to happen. And we've had over the last few years, we've had the Saudi money, we've had obviously the Newcastle investment. When you have that, that's going to make a difference. So I don't think it'll be, exactly like this, but we may be in a phase where people are more sensible. I thought, for example, in this window, people would lose their heads. And actually what's happened is the teams, it's been very easy over the years for owners of clubs to just think, just one more player. But actually, people have been very restrained this time.
And is that a good thing for the game? Have been?
Look, I think people who are big supporters of FFP generally will say that the wage deflation that appears to be in the game and the quiet transfer market is a sign of FFP working. Now, the bit that misses is that actually, as a product, we know that people love transfers.
Yes, yes.
And in terms of keeping eyeballs on the game.
Exactly.
People dream about transfers.
Yeah.
Right? It's an important element to keeping the product fresh. And, they've got to be quite careful that they don't kill the golden goose when it comes to transfers.
Yeah. I mean, myself and Kavi Solikol at Sky wrote a book about deadline day. If this window had been in it, it would have been a very short finishing chapter, I have to say. Stefan made a great point there, Ben. External money coming into the game breathes oxygen into the scene, and of course that initiates spending. I think that's virtually what you're saying. So the Saudis will be back, won't they, in the summer, Ben? And they'll be back laden with money.
Yeah, and I think it's not just about the money, it's the fact that these deals, even if they're 10, 15, 20 million, have very preferable payment terms, which allow clubs outside of Saudi, if they choose to sell to Saudi, to move in the market. And that's very helpful. Liverpool found that, Chelsea found that. So it's not just the number, it's the structure of the deal. And then if you flip it the other way, there'll be some star power that does have a massive amount of money where an overpaying takes place. And that's where Salah, 150 million to Al Ittihad, it was rejected, but maybe the Saudis come back. This time it's Al Hilal. That's where De Bruyne. You can suddenly fund an entire window, potentially, off one asset that might be in their early 30s, and that may allow you to revamp with 3 or 4 players and stay within the financial rules.
Ben, we talk about winners and losers. Could you classify Jordan Henderson as a winner in this window? He got what he wanted. He got out.
Well, I think he's a winner if he makes the Euros squad. He's a loser if he doesn't make the Euros squad. And we have to look at Conor Gallagher, we have to look at Curtis Jones, because the reality is you go to Ajax, and from a personal perspective, yes, he'll be glad to be out of Saudi Arabia. He can say it's a football decision, but we know that he didn't settle there. But if that first 6 months in Saudi Arabia, for whatever reason, was a great experience, but it didn't quite work out, his family were in Bahrain, the facilities were not Premier League, the team hadn't won since October, if all of that leads to a lull, a rustiness, he can go to Ajax and he can feel settled, but then if he's not picked for a final Euros, he'll still be a loser, in my view.
Ben, be honest with me, just before Alex comes in, how did the Saudis really view Henderson's departure?
Well, I think the wider Saudi deal makers were very keen on optics, which is why the day he was announced to Ajax, Steven Gerrard got a new deal. And then you can say, same club, one out, but another legend wants to stay. And it's the same club, it's the same city, and clearly there was a PR element to that. I think Henderson was respected as a professional. It wasn't one of the biggest clubs in Saudi Arabia, so there was an understanding that it was difficult for him and his family to settle. And they believe that the Saudi Pro League is able to move on even without Henderson. But if it was Benzema, or if it was another big star, like Riyad Mahrez, it might have been a slightly different story.
Interesting, isn't it?
Well, you asked the question, was he a winner or a loser? I think in terms of his reputation and his brand, and football is all about brand now, I think he's a loser. I don't think he ever really dealt with the questions around his move to Saudi Arabia, where that left his principles and those causes that he was such a great ambassador for. And he's not really answered those questions since he left either. So I think Jordan Henderson has got an awful lot to do to repair that side of his personality, and there's a lot of people who won't ever understand why he went to Saudi Arabia and for it to end so quickly. Just a couple of late deals that are going through, Jim. We mentioned the Forest goalkeeper sales. That's now been confirmed, the contract until 2027. And we shouldn't ignore the Championship. There's been a lot of big deals done in the second tier over the course of this window. Hull City have just signed their 7th player of the window. Anis Zaroury has come in on loan from Burnley. They picked up Ryan Giles as well from Luton, who's got Premier League pedigree, and Fabio Carvalho, who of course was a really exciting player when Liverpool signed him from Fulham. So keep an eye on Hull in terms of that promotion chase in the second half of the season.
I think they're 2 points or so off the playoffs. Actually, Stefan Borsen, there is an owner who's come into the game and has very much fallen in love with his football club, and they have fallen in love with him, Atun Ilikali. He loves the place, and it's easy to see why the fans flock to him because of activity in this window and other things he's done in and around that place.
Yeah, the problem is if it goes wrong and they don't make promotion. You know, we all saw Rick Parry in Parliament at the committee, and there's a serious problem in the Championship as well with their version of financial fair play. And it's great to sign 7 players if you get promotion. It's not that great if you then go and fail financial fair play, because we know that in that division there are lots of point deductions.
Yeah.
So it's a fine balance. Of course, people love signing players. You know, we've all been there, you know, especially on some of these deadline days.
Of course.
So,
our Saudi expert, Ben Jacobs, is with us. Ben, I'll put it to you. You know the temperature out there, and I don't mean the heat. I mean the chat, the talk in Saudi. He's going to remain a Liverpool player, and he'll pull on the Liverpool jersey again. You know where I'm going with this. Mo Salah, after the summer window, is he gone?
I think there's more chance of him going now Jurgen Klopp's gone, because it's a new era. So players, Virgil van Dijk, half hinted at it and then kind of backtracked, are going to start wondering whether now's the time. Salah's at a crossroads, Liverpool's at a crossroads. So if Klopp stayed, I think that I would have predicted he'd go to Saudi in 2025 and he'd do one more season in Europe with Liverpool. But Klopp going now might mean, especially if there's silverware, Salah goes out on a high. And then the only twist from Saudi's perspective is it won't be Al Ittihad, because Al Ittihad got preference for Salah because they are the Saudi champions and they were competing in the Club World Cup. So, of course, you want him to be the poster boy. Now, they're 7th in the Saudi Pro League. Al Hilal are seemingly cruising to the title. So I think that the offer will now come from Al Hilal, arguably the biggest club, or one of them anyway, in Asia, rather than Al Ittihad. But the offer will still be around the same number, and that would be really difficult for Liverpool to reject, especially if a new manager is thinking, I want budget to revamp.
Sure. Out of pure interest, what likely is the offer going to end up being?
I think it'll be 100 million up front and between 25 and 50 million in bonuses.
It is remarkable, Stefan. I mean, we're talking about money. The Saudis have changed the whole scene as well. Not on this occasion, because there has been largely inactivity, but they're in and around the scene, and the summer will be different.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a little bit surprising that they weren't kind of more commercial about the spending. You know, given...
How do you mean?
Well, given that they can set the parameters by which they split the spend that Ben's spoken about, and given the distress that's out there across Europe, I would have envisaged that the plan would have been to take advantage of that and to leverage that negotiating power quite forcefully in this window, because you know teams are quite keen to sell. I think they're not keen to give players away, but they're quite keen to sell. They won't admit it, but actually quite a few teams need to sell.
Is Saudi a loophole for clubs who need to sell to get around FFP?
Well, I mean, you know, we can all have views on.
Come on, Stefan.
Well, no, it's not a loophole, because they are, as we understand it, a legitimate league. They have been a successful league in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so it's not a loophole. I mean, you know, nobody is suggesting that if the Saudis come and buy a player from Liverpool, that there's any kind of relationship there or any kind of connection. So
there are, though, aren't there, when it comes to Chelsea and Saudi Arabia?
I don't think there are with Chelsea. I mean, I think that story has been debunked.
Newcastle.
But Newcastle, clearly there's a relationship, and the rules are already in place to test that. So any sale from Newcastle to any of the clubs with certainly with PIF ownership, but I think probably actually more broadly will probably end up getting tested for fair value by the Premier League. And there's a whole section in the Premier League rules about how that's done. So You know, I think the amount of leeway that Newcastle will have to play around with that, I think will be pretty minor.
Ben, I've got a good pal of mine's a Celtic fan and a West Ham fan, and he thought that Jota was going to come out of Saudi Arabia, once of Celtic, and head to West Ham. But it fell down at the last moment. What happened with that one?
Yeah, the problem with Jota, two things. One, tax implications, because if players leave Saudi Arabia before 2 years, then they become liable for tax, and naturally they want to recoup that when they make the move. So they can terminate the contract and try and get maybe a big sign-on fee or higher wages, or alternatively they ask the buying club to shoulder the burden. So there's tax implications, and then there's wage issues as well, because at the top end, Jota was on close to 200,000 English pounds a week, and that's 40,000 more than Lucas Paquetá. So he becomes the highest played footballer at the club, and he's only there on an 18-month loan. So that's a big challenge, and I think Jota was very intent to keep the money side and not take a big wage cut or do what Henderson did and terminate the contract. So that's why that one didn't happen. The other thing I was going to say just briefly was what Stefan mentions about the finances can be changed by a big surprise, and that's in the next year or so, there's going to be further privatisation in the Saudi Pro League. Without boring people who want to go to bed because the window's already closed, the simple way of summarising it is now PIF won't control every club, but the ministry, the government, will allow foreign investors to come into the Saudi Pro League. So PIF may have majority control over 14 clubs, not just the 4, but instead of having majority, they may allow foreign investment, which means if you're Chelsea, multi-club model, or anybody else, you might be eyeing a 25% stake in a Saudi club, and that could change the whole dynamic of the market.
Okay. I think I know the answer to this. Anything else going on out there, Alex Crook?
No late surprises. Still no official confirmation of Armando Broja to Fulham. That's the one we're all waiting on, but he's passed his medical. The paperwork has been completed. They're probably just working at Fulham on some fancy announcement video. But I think that's your lot, to be honest, on this deadline day. We weren't expecting fireworks, but I tell you what, we kept it simmering.
Well, we sure did. I mean, normally, Stefan, around this time last January, as I said earlier, when Alex and I were on talkSPORT, I was looking at my phone and getting an update from one of the hierarchy members at Chelsea telling me we've got an extension on Enzo Fernandez. But tonight I'm being reminded I've got a dental appointment next Monday. So that's how it is. It's been a quiet window, but it's still an interesting one. We're back to round it up after this. Hi everybody, it's Jim White, Alex Crook, financial expert Stefan Borson, and our Saudi football correspondent here at talkSPORT. But he's that and a whole lot more, Ben Jacobs, as we've been rounding up the movers and shakers. The last few deals that were done in this January transfer window, a window very much dominated by FFP. Alex Crook is just going to take us through the final deals, if there were indeed any, that were done that side of 11 o'clock and now this side of 11 o'clock.
Well, a little update from Fulham. I've asked the question, should we be worried that this is dragging on? The answer is no. Breuer is a Fulham player. And we've had a departure from Burnley and a good signing, I think, for Leeds United in the Championship. Connor Roberts will spend the rest of the season on loan at the Welsh international at Ellen Road. So as I said earlier, a lot of clubs in the Championship doing business. Southampton signing David Brooks from Bournemouth a couple of days ago. I think that's a really good piece of business for them. And they kept Carl Walker-Peters and Shay Adams. The latter, in particular, had Premier League interest, but he's decided, I'm going to take my chance. My contract expires in the summer. Let's see where we can go with that.
Actually, on that theme, Alex, those at the bottom, have they done enough, or are they resigned to their fate?
Well, I think Chris Wilder would say he's not resigned to his fate. They've got in 3 players, Sheffield United, Ivo Gerbic, the goalkeeper from Atletico Madrid, Ben Brereton Diaz has actually started really well at Sheffield United, having struggled over at Villarreal. That was a loan signing. And they got Mason Holgate in the door today. That was an interesting one because he's been on loan at Southampton, wasn't getting a game under Russell Martin in the Championship, terminates the loan, and he's back in the Premier League. So he's had a go, Chris Wilder. Will they stay up? No. Will Burnley stay up? No. Will Luton stay up? Possibly.
OK, possibly. I would like Luton to stay up. Ben, Prince Abdullah, Sheffield United owner, of course, resident out in Saudi Arabia. He's an interesting character. Towards the end of last season, I was up in Covent Garden chatting to him, and he was telling me he was out there and that for family reasons, he was heading back to Saudi, but that he would be settling the club on. He's still there. He's still in the thick of it. And from what I see, is getting on with life as the owner of Sheffield United. So there's no change when it looked like it would be all change.
Yeah, it's business as usual, although the feeling is if they stay in the Premier League, the club becomes marketable, and then perhaps it will be a case of putting that on the market. And one of the reasons for that is any investor in Saudi, private or, of course, linked to government, has to still play into this Vision 2030 and now 2034 World Cup. And that means that, as with, for example, Sheikh Jassim and the failed Qatar bid for Manchester United, it doesn't matter how you do it, you still need the blessing from the highest possible powers. And strategically, Saudi want to invest elsewhere. So there's not maybe as much backing from the very top of Saudi Arabia now, whether strategically or commercially, as there was when that acquisition first took place. If Sheffield United go down, they want to get rid of it, but if they can stay up, it becomes more marketable. But the Saudis, I can tell you, are looking more now at Monaco, that's on the market, and Marseille. It's the French market between now and probably 2025, where somebody in Saudi Arabia with a government blessing wants to invest.
I mean, it's so intriguing, isn't it, Stefan? Stefan, while you're here, of course, one-time financial advisor to Manchester City. Nonetheless, here it comes, Stefan. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, I'm being asked to ask you by a whole horde of Manchester United fans who are watching us and listening to us on talkSPORT, watching us on YouTube and enjoying the output. And I'm delighted to hear that. Thank you so much for that. Stefan, the arrival of Sir Jim, what's it going to look like come this summer? What impact will he have made in the first 6 months of his arrival there?
Well, the first thing is they're going to put some money into the club. And by putting the equity in, the first part of the fundraising, it will push up United's limit that they can spend up to the 105 of the P&S FFP limit. So that will give them a bit more breathing space. I mean, that's part of the reason why they've not been able to do anything at all in this window without selling, is they're at their limit, and that limit will rise. So they'll probably be busy, I would think. And, you know, they've hired a best in class from City to be the CEO. So, you know, a great start. Look, he's a smart guy, but he's also emotional, and we know what happens when emotion gets in the way of football. And you know, we'll have to see what happens in terms of his ability to actually make the signings on a very sort of commercial basis.
But Stefan is also a minority shareholder. Are you surprised at the amount of say he will have in the football operation?
Well, look, I mean, that's the deal. I think he'll have a say across the entire business. I think ultimately where that's ended up is that the Glazers are clearly happy to effectively hand over day-to-day management of the business to people sponsored by Ratcliffe. And that's the first move. I mean, you know, to bring in a new CEO that's clearly led by Sir Jim Ratcliffe is a sign that actually the Glazers are happy to allow him some freedom. I think clearly in any of these sorts of situations where you have a minority shareholder, if it doesn't work, then everything changes. And that's when it could get really interesting for fans of all other clubs, because it could easily turn into quite a chaotic situation. Alex is looking forward to that.
And no, but I was just going to ask you on Omar Barada. You and I have spoken about this individual with Simon on talkSPORT in the morning before. What kind of impact will he have at United, judging by what he did at City? And you knew him at City, right?
No, I don't know him personally, but I've heard exceptional things about him.
Exceptional things?
Yeah, he's known as being an exceptional operator. So they've hired... You know, it's a smart hire. You know, probably.
Is it best in class?
Well, that's how he's described to me by people that know, and you know, clearly he's been in an environment over the last 10 to 15 years where, you know, he's been at the best place, and so lots of lessons have been learnt, and you know, he's had the benefit of that he'll take to United, but. Look, it's easier said than done. You don't join as a CEO somewhere and everything magically is repaired.
It's a process, isn't it? It's going to take time.
It's going to take time.
And they still need a director of football for me. And that will happen. And I think it'll be Dan Ashworth. And I think that will be the right appointment.
Where are City as we head into 2024 regarding the finances, Stefan? We've asked you before, it's impossible to know when these charges will be taken further and when they'll have to plead their case. But what's your hunch in it?
Well, City are in a great position. I mean, let's not forget they're treble winners, and the club at all levels is firing. They're clearly not overly concerned, you know, internally. They don't, you know, you can see that there's not a lot of focus or concern from a public perspective. And it's certainly not filtered down into the footballing side. I think it's an endorsement of the club that United have gone for Omar. Ultimately, I think it's very unlikely United would not have done extensive due diligence, both in respect of him personally, but also in his involvement in the sort of underlying matters that relate to City's charges, and you know, he's been in positions of responsibility in respect of the commercial matters that are now the focus of those charges. So
we're going to get to know more. That is for sure.
Yeah,
once he takes up his position.
The likelihood is that they've done their due diligence and they're comfortable.
How is McElhenney finding life out in the Saudi Pro League, Ben? I knew him when he was at Chelsea. I've known him a while, but that was a big move for him.
Huge move. He's a smooth operator, and I think he carries a lot of respect. It was interesting because the former Manchester City chief executive, Gary Crook, was part of the project. And my understanding is that he was the driving force behind Get Messi. Messi didn't arrive, and then it was all change after Messi. I'm not saying that that's on Gary, but he was a driving force behind it. So there's pressure, especially when you work centrally, because you're across all the stars. So you're not just being judged by one club that goes on and wins the title. You've got to do everything. And I think Michael's relishing it, but it's a different dynamic. And one thing I'm told is that there'll be likely a new CEO and also a vice CEO of the Saudi Pro League and a restructuring. And this is not a negative. It's actually more senior Saudi figures, respected ones, are going to go into eventually what becomes the World Cup LOC, the local organising committee. And that means a reshuffling. And as a consequence, it will have a knock-on effect within the Saudi Pro League. So I think we're going to see big change between now and the summer. But Michael, I think, is encouraging the clubs to be less rash. He feels like they spent their pocket money in that first summer and then they ran out. Whereas I think when we get into this coming summer, he's going to be saying, just take your time and think less about stars and fees and think more about structure and strategy.
Ben Jacobs, thanks for being with us tonight. And to you, Stefan Bosch and Alex Crook, great job. That's been it from us on Transfer Deadline Day with a sprinkling of FFP. We've enjoyed it. We hope you have as well, as we hand over to the lads on the Sports Bar on talkSPORT.